Yeah, President Cyril Ramaphosa recently docked Defense Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula's salary as a rebuke after she allowed governing party officials to fly on an Air Force plane to Zimbabwe with her on the 9th of September. Mapisa-Nqakula was accused of misusing state resources for party political business. The Defense Force had argued she was on official business and had simply given the other passengers a lift. But President Cyril Ramaphosa called it an error of judgment. Some in the opposition saw this as a slap on the wrist. To discuss this now and how the president could have handled this, and of course the ANC flight and various other issues that continue to dog the SANDF. We're speaking to COPE leader and who was, of course, a former defense minister himself between June 1999 and September 2008. We're speaking to Mosiuoa Lekota. Lekota, good evening, and thank you so much for your time tonight. There's certainly a lot to talk about where the SANDF is concerned, and you at some point were at the helm of this particular department. Let's just begin first with the jet saga. How do you think the president could have handled this?
Good evening, and good evening to your listeners. It's very difficult to ask me to pass judgment on a decision that the president has already made. Let me just say that the Constitution says clearly what may and may not be done. First of all, that no one may deploy the armed forces without appropriate authority. The president and the president alone is the commander-in-chief. There is no minister who has the power to deploy armed forces or the weapons and so on and so on, especially beyond the borders of the country that is South Africa. So this is an extremely serious offense.
Lekota, you know, if I can come in there, when you look at the fact that, I mean, there's also another issue here, which is that fence at Beitbridge. When you look at what has happened, I mean, at some point, you know, the money moved from over just 24 million rand and ballooned to 40 million. And this fence has been described as useless by the current minister. Scopa has described it as a sham. And, you know, there doesn't seem to be really any confidence in this particular fence. What do you make of this fence that sits at the Beitbridge border post?
No, ma'am. Let me finish the point I was trying to make. When Parliament budgets money, there's money budgeted for defense, and there's money budgeted for health, for schools, and all of that. No one can decide to take money budgeted for defense purposes and use it for other means. It's a serious violation of the law. And there can be no pardoning that kind of thing. The president should simply have put his foot down and made it absolutely clear. This is impermissible. If the Minister of Defense of South Africa does not know that money budgeted for defense is for defense and defense alone, for no other purpose. If a minister doesn't know that, I don't know what the minister knows. And when you take into account that violations of this nature have been done even under the previous president, it becomes very clear that none of the people in this government understand what they are about. This is why when the president deploys armed forces outside the country, the law first and foremost requires the president to inform the country in advance if there are extraordinary circumstances that compel him to move like that, he is given, there's a prescribed period, I think 7 days, within which he can summon Parliament and brief Parliament about where he is deployed, armed forces, and so on and so on, how many they were, and so on. And so every detail must be placed there. But when a minister takes a weapon of the nation and goes to another country to fetch a girlfriend or some other thing like that, without the authorization by the president and all of that, I mean, it cannot even be done, and the president is not empowered to authorize that a vehicle of the armed forces can go and fetch a girlfriend in another country. Now, all of these things that have been done just shows absolute lack of understanding of the Constitution, the seriousness with which it was written and is prescribed. And the president, there are procedures that are indicated what the president should do if something like that has happened in extraordinary circumstances. This is absolutely impermissible to violate the airspace of another country, because it means even the other country did not know that a military vehicle of our country has crossed into that country with so many people, what they were going there for, and so on. You cannot do something like that.
And Ntate Lekota, if I can just ask about this particular offense, and especially because you've ventilated quite a lot when it comes to what has happened here. You're talking, of course, about, the different scandals that continue then to surround this particular department. Let's zoom into this fence at the Beitbridge border post. Do you think it was a waste of money?
Well, first of all, it was an even more serious offense, violation of the space of another country. You know what that means? Those people could have shot that aeroplane down. Because here you have an aeroplane carrying people not known coming into another country as airspace. It amounts to an offensive action. But as I have already said, the money that was being used was budgeted by Parliament for defense purposes. What defense purposes was this ANC leaders going to do there?
And
authorized to act on behalf of the people of South Africa and using defense resources of the country.
And
it's far more than wasting money. First of all, that money is misused. It was never for that purpose. It was for defense purposes. We are not aware of any defense action that was required to go into Zimbabwean airspace.
And Ntate Lekota, I would like us to also focus on another subject matter before we run out of time. Let's look at the arrests that have been made by the Hawks in recent days, particularly also when you look at that asbestos project in the Free State and the subsequent movement that then happened around that space. What is your reaction to what the Hawks have been doing in recent days?
Let me tell you this, my dear friend and the listeners. We keep talking about corruption. Corruption is not just this kind of stuff that's happening. It's in every area of government. The people who are in charge of the affairs of our nation do not understand the responsibility they carry. They just don't. They think you can play with these things and do as you please. They don't look what are the rules, what do the rules say, what are the regulations saying, what is it? They don't even realize what a serious disaster they can cause between nations. It's not for nothing, man, that the OAU at its founding took a resolution that we must not interfere with the borders that had already been established. Because territory that belongs to other people, that's recognized by international law, that territory is not to be entered into by anybody other than the people who live in that territory, who are recognized as the citizens of that country. And therefore, lives can be lost. And that resolution taken by the OAU was intended to protect the lives of the people of different countries in Africa, so that we don't enter other space of other people and the others don't enter the space that is our space.
And as a final question from me tonight, Ntate Lekota, let's look at the developments in the Zondo Commission. We saw yesterday, supporters of former President Jacob Zuma marching there to hand over a memorandum saying that if the chairperson does not recuse himself, they're going to render, the country ungovernable. And also, of course, this is all in a bid to ensure that he recuses himself, and former President Jacob Zuma then, also picking issue with the fact that the commission chair is who he is and saying that, that he should also recuse himself. What do you make of these developments that we are seeing around the State Capture Commission of Inquiry?
What I make of it is that as a country, we have not educated. We must educate our citizens. We must educate at school, in the schools and everywhere. We must educate and educate. Because people say these things that they are saying. They do these things that they are doing. Because they don't understand that there's international law governing these things. I listened to some of the things that Kalmi House was saying. The Deputy Chief Justice is not a youngster who does not know what he's doing. He's not only studied for years and passed these things that he has passed and so on. He has been drilled to educate South African citizens, to manage the affairs of the people. Because if he makes mistakes, he can also cause the lives of other people. Nobody can tell the Deputy Chief Justice of this country how to do his work. He knows his work. And if he has done anything wrong, there are appropriate steps and people and institutions that can address that. It's shocking that somebody who was the president of our country can speak in the terms that I heard spoken about by the Deputy Chief Justice of our country.
Ntate Lekota, thank you so much for your time tonight. That's COPE leader there and former Defense Minister, Ntate Mosiuoa Lekota.